Okay, so in this video, I want to take a look at the spinal cord, focusing on the gross anatomy first, and then we'll kind of zoom in into the cells and naming the parts and the regions. So imagine if you took a cross-section through me and then looked down at my spinal cord. That's what we're going to draw. So we're going to start with something that kind of dips in the back. We're going to get wide towards the front. Oh, that was squeaky. A little gap in the front side, and then we'll come back up and around on this side. Ooh, very squeaky. Put a little circle in the middle. And then we're gonna come branch in, bump over here, come back out the front. Wrap across, up and around. We're gonna do the same thing. Bump on the side, wrap it back. And then we're gonna do that in the back here with another loop. Very squeaky, but hey, art. All right, so this is close-ish to what a spinal cord would look like. This area in here is going to be darker, but I don't want to color it all in because I actually want to label it later and come back and color code. But let's talk about some of the anatomy here. So we have in the center here, that's our central canal. Remember, that's where cerebral spinal fluid flows, so we'll label stuff off to the side. So central canal. And then we have along the midline, we have some indentations. It's got a bigger gap in the front. It's one of the ways you can tell if you're looking at the front versus the back of a spinal cord. So here it's wider. So we have an anterior, and it's on the midline, so median, fissure. Remember that longitudinal fissure in the brain? It was actual separation. We have the same thing here. In the back, it doesn't quite separate as far. They actually kind of touch each other. So it's more like what we saw in the brain where they were touching. Those little indents, those are sulci. So we see that again. Now, but we're in the back, we have a posterior, and then median again, and then now this is a sulcus. Okay, some other anatomy, as I mentioned before, this is going to be gray. What makes gray matter look gray is the fact that you don't have myelination. Myelination is where you're insulating axons. It's made out of fat. It's a fatty material. It wraps around the axons so you can send electrical signals and not have that signal dissipate or go too slowly. And so we'll see the white matter out here. That's where the axons are running up and down that spinal cord. Remember, this is a cross section. So if you ever lay it flat, those signals are moving up and down this way. Over here where it's gray, it's because you don't have that myelination. So out here is the white matter. Places where you have white matter, we call those the funiculi. So funiculi is white matter. And so funiculi is where you will have axons, because that's white for the insulation. And then horns are the gray matter. And so this is where you'll have somas and the dendrites. And so the horns are here, here, and here. So we'll have a posterior horn, because we're in the back. So we'll do this. So posterior horn, I'm just going to do letters to hopefully that makes sense. So posterior horn. Then over here we're going to have this on the side, so this is your lateral horn. Here's in the front, so that's the anterior horn. Actually, I like that better. We'll do that. Put it right in the middle. So move that over. So posterior horn. Yeah, that looks way better. So posterior horn, lateral horn, anterior horn. And then for the funiculi, we'll follow the same pattern. Posterior funiculus, that's this region. Lateral funiculus, that's off to the side. And then in the front here would be the anterior funiculus. So those are anatomical classifications. Now, we'll kind of draw where things come in and go off of the spinal cord before we get into then functional anatomy. So these are based on structure. There are other ways you can label things. We've run across that before, so we could label them based on what they're doing. We'll do that next. But before we go there, let's talk about what branches to and from this. So if you're looking at the posterior side, you're going to have a branch coming in over here, and as it comes in, you'll see a little bump along the road, so I probably should have made it a little wider here. And then it comes in on the posterior side. And then we'll see it over again. There's that bump, and then we come back out. As we come out the front, we're going to meet that same branch. See if I can get my marker to work a little bit better. So they're going to meet eventually to make a spinal nerve. So that's what this is, where they finally come together. This is a spinal nerve. Spinal nerves then will branch from there, depending on where you're going in the body. So you can have some going out to your back. Some will wrap around the sides. Ooh, that is super squeaky. And then to the front of the body. And then you'll have some that will stay kind of in the body cavities. And those we actually will spend a lot of time with in a later video, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So this is kind of your branching system. What's happening here is that you're going to have a spinal nerve where you have information kind of going in and out. I think of this like a main highway. So this is the main highway coming to and from your central nervous system. So we have, I think of it like northbound, southbound traffic here. So we have stuff coming in and stuff going out. But once you get to here, we're going to separate. And so this is your on-ramp if we think of this as your city. So if this is your city, this would be, say, if somebody pokes you in the back, because remember that's where this is going, it's from your back, you would take that information of touch and you would specifically go in this direction. And you would communicate that information to another cell in here. We'll come back to that in a second as well. But remember that bump? The reason why there's a bump there is that's where the somas are located. These are typically unipolar neurons. One pole cell body's off to the side. And so maybe let's say somebody poked you in the side. You'll do the same thing. Here's another sensory neuron coming in. It'll branch to the back. Its soma's over here hanging out in that ganglia. And then we can send information in. Now depending, let's say instead of them poking you in the side, let's say maybe it wasn't a they. Let's say it was something that you're not aware of. So maybe it's water levels that's coming from in here. So instead of that one, let's do this one. So we have information coming in, it'll go sensory in the back. Again, somas are hanging out over here, and then we're gonna go deeper into there. So let's do that for that one instead of this one. These ones will stay up higher because these ones are stuff that you're aware of. This one is something you're not aware of, and that'll come back later as being important. So as you're looking at it, only sensory stuff is happening in the back. This is a dorsal root. Dorsal root, sensory only. This right here, that little bump where you have a bunch of somas hanging out in a little gang, that's a dorsal root ganglia. And I did draw it coming from different locations, so let's talk about those. So right here off that spinal nerve, that branch that goes to your back, that's a ramus. And now that's a posterior ramus because you're coming from your back. You have an anterior ramus because it will wrap around the side of your body and into the front. That's the other one. This is both information that you're conscious of. Notice how I had them stop here at this back part of the posterior horn? That's because you're dealing with sensory information you're aware of. These are somatic sensory neurons. Remember, somatic meaning conscious? So this part right here, so I'm going to color it in, is going to be your somatic sensory, and you're talking to another neuron. Remember we kind of drawing them where they'll stop and talk to something. Maybe it'll send information up to the brain. Maybe it'll send information for a reflex over here. But they're sending information. They're starting the central nervous system. These are interneurons. So the purple ones here are interneurons. And you could have some even deeper, but we'll talk about that one in a minute. So interneurons are the purple ones. The pink ones are your sensory ones. The ones that made it all the way from the posterior ramus, anterior ramus, they're stopping in the back. That's information you're aware of. So this spot right here in the back of that posterior horn is dealing with information coming from a somatic sensory neuron. And if it's coming from a somatic sensory neuron, that means you're aware of it. So we're going to call this the somatic sensory nuclei. Remember, nuclei are just clusters of somas inside of the central nervous system. So the somatic sensory nuclei are where we have neurons, specifically of interneurons, that get information from somatic sensory neurons. If you're not aware of it, that would be this region here. So here to here. I'll kind of color it in a little bit. That's if you're not aware of it, but you're still getting sensory information, but maybe now it's from here. These are actually called the communicating rami. And the communicating rami go to the internal organs. And this is actually called an autonomic ganglia. Meaning it's part of your autonomic nervous system. You're not aware of it. So the sensory neuron here would be a visceral sensory neuron. And if you have a visceral sensory neuron, this is going to be part of that unconscious information. So we're going to stop in a different part of the posterior horn. So we're going to be a little bit deeper. And that makes sense. Stuff that we're aware of is more superficial. If you're not aware of it, it tends to be the deeper stuff, like the internal stuff. So here on the inside, you're dealing with autonomic information, or visceral information. So this would be the visceral sensory nuclei. So visceral sensory nuclei would be sensory information you're not aware of. Now, what if you have information going out? There's two different pieces left that we haven't talked about with the gray horns here. So we could come from the anterior part. Remember I talked about a reflex here? So maybe somebody did poke you in the back and then you want to like twitch away from it. You can send information directly to something that can do something about it and send it right back out this way and towards the muscles of the back. Notice that the somas are starting inside the spinal cord. There aren't any bumps along the way here. So on this side, we have, if this is dorsal, this is ventral. So this is ventral root. Ventral root is motor information only. So ventral root here, we're taking conscious information out towards an effector. And that could, be another one here, maybe going out towards an arm to say maybe defend yourself. Like, okay, you twitched your back muscles and now you're ready to like swing. I don't know. So we have different ways that you can send that information out. But remember, we're going with conscious here. So this part, the anterior horn, is again another place where we have somatic. So this is output, so it's somatic motor nuclei. Again, clusters of the somas, of the cell bodies. And then our last place we haven't done yet is going to be where we have somas. Oh, I've already used pink. Let's do a different one. Let's go with this one. So now we have somas going to maybe smooth muscle. So we're going to go into those internal organs. Maybe we're going to talk to muscle inside of our, and I guess I probably should have showed this before. Autonomic ganglia, right? It's the reason why it's in a ganglia is because we have other cells we're going to go talk to. So here we do a little relay. So let's say we're going to talk to another cell here, then that will go to like the stomach or the intestines. We're not aware of it. It's happening automatically. So this part, the lateral horn, remember lateral horn meaning the anatomical name for it. The lateral horn is where we find our autonomic, so autonomic motor. And I forgot half the word. So autonomic motor nuclei. Again, because we have somas. So we could probably make this a little bit wider and better looking art, but hopefully you're getting a sense of sensory information is going in the back, motor information is in the front, conscious is more superficial than unconscious, and there's a spot right here in the middle which is a little weird because here you actually are communicating back and forth. This is called the gray commissure. Gray commissure is actually axons. Remember this part I told you earlier and I said usually? The gray commissure is axons that doesn't have myelin. They're not going very far, so they don't have to go fast. So we are having some communication back and forth between the two sides, but you're not myelinating it so it looks gray because you're lacking that insulation, the fat. So lots of information here, but biggest thing to kind of keep track of is the stuff I kind of summarized here, but also as you look out here, pay attention to the fact that you're only sensory in the dorsal root, only motor in the ventral root, but everything else is mixed. So that they're like highways, so that can have information going in and out, same here and same here. All right, everyone, thanks for watching.